of the community that has responded so lovingly. And I will do everything I can, both in this campaign, but after it, to stand with you and to support you and to try to promote the kinds of changes that will prevent this from happening to other people, other families, and other communities in the future.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to acknowledge again the senior senator from the state of Florida, Bill Nelson, who lives right here in Orlando, so this is his hometown too, and Senator Nelson was on site very early Sunday morning on the 12th to lend any assistance that he could to be a contact for the federal government. I think he's called me just about every other day since that time, or had his staff reach out. So, Senator, we so appreciate everything that you've done to help us help Orlando. Thank you. All right, so what I would like to do is introduce each of the panelists, and I'll start with Terry DiCarlo. Terry is the Executive Director of the LGBT Center of Central Florida. I didn't actually know that was the entire name. Everybody just knows it as the Center, knows what you're talking about. So the center's been open around the clock since June the 12th, fielding thousands of calls and requests for psychological and financial help from victims and the LGBT community as a whole. So Terry, could you tell us what that night has come to mean to you?
Still plays back in the mind. I was asleep at about 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone call came in from my board president that there was a shooting. That's all we knew, that there was a shooting down at Pulse. And I said to my partner, okay, let's go. And we got dressed and we got down there, and immediately ran into one of our beloved police officers who pulled us back and said, we're about to set off an explosion. It's a lot worse than we think it is. We found some stuff, and that day was mostly a haze. You don't really comprehend what happened that day, because it just played out in front of your mind. With our SWAT team going down the street, it's something you see in movies. You don't think you're going to see it in your hometown. But we immediately jumped on the phone. We got the center open. I stayed on site down there. About 400 people showed up at the center by about 7 o'clock in the morning. Just opened the whole place up, and within an hour or two, we had lines of cars around the block, people donating. What can we do? As things played out down on my end, I would get information down to the center, and they would say, okay, we need this, and it just played out. It was organic as it happened. But in the end, it worked. We've been going around the clock. We had 600 counselors from around the world fly in, just saying, I want to help. What can we do? And they're crisis counselors, and they showed up that day. And we took them on. We got them into churches and in schools and any place that would open their doors that we could send people to. So, yeah, we've been going around the clock. It's been nonstop for the past month and a half. We're still going. It's still the roller coaster. Yesterday was a nice day where I could actually get some stuff done, and today it's right back up again. But this is our mission, and this is what we'll do, and we'll keep going. We know it's going to take a long, long time. I'm now staffing the United Assistance Center. I have 2 staff members that I put in there as victims advocates with the United Way. So we've taken this on, and this is our community. These are our brothers and sisters that were killed that day and hurt, and thousands of more that were affected by this. And this is our job. This is our community. We are the community center. So we'll do what we have to do.
Terry, could I ask you, what do you see as the long-term priorities? Is it ongoing counseling and support services?
Absolutely. The support is going to last for years. We have many of the victims that were in the club, some that were able to get out in time, that now have survivor's remorse. So, why did I make it out the door? Why did I leave 10 minutes before? We're getting a lot of those people into the center, as well as the victims that were there that might have made it out, thank God, but are fine during the day, but when the sun goes down, the thoughts come back into their head. We've worked with the FBI to get as many of the videos and pictures off those people's phones so they don't have to see them. But it still plays back in their heads every time. So yeah, long-term counseling, PTSD, it's going to go on for quite a long time.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Commissioner Sheehan. That's Patty Sheehan has served as a district commissioner in the city of Orlando since 2000, and she has been the champion of the Central Florida LGBTQ community since even before she was a city commissioner. She works tirelessly to promote human rights. The Pulse nightclub is in her district, and she's been out front with her support for her community. Patty?
Thank you, Mayor Dyer, and I'd just like to say this was a horrible thing that happened basically in our main street, just blocks from our city hall. And we've done so much on our city council to promote diversity and inclusion. And the fact that this happened at Latino night in a gay club, you can't get more diverse than that. There were African Americans who were killed. This was a very diverse group of millennials who are the answer to our problems in America. They were the young, wonderful people that should have had it better. They're the first generation to be able to marry. And the fact that they were mowed down in the prime of their lives, I'm just very passionate about this, and I don't ever want to see it happen again. I've talked about my own grief and our grief in this community, but it goes beyond just grieving. We have to make sure, I don't have children of my own. I kind of look at this new group of, this younger generation of LGBTQ as my kids. And it felt like they came into our living room and shot them. And this can't happen again. And I just want to say, hating another group of people is not the answer. I feel very strongly that the Muslim community, we should not hate them. We should be embracing each other, and we have. And I'm very proud that we have done that. Hating a Muslim person is the same thing as hating a gay person, and hating a Hispanic person, or hating anyone because of their background. And we have got to stop dividing this community by ethnic origins and by religions and by who hates who. We've got to start being defined by who we love. And I'm so proud that I wanted Orlando to be defined that way because I know this is who we are as a community. And Mayor Dyer, it's been an honor to serve along with you, but we have a lot of work to do, clearly, and we cannot allow this country to become a country of hatred and division and just, it's awful. And I honestly believe if we are people who believe in embracing one another, that we have got to stop this kind of rhetoric. Because we are better when we are together. So Secretary Clinton, I thank you so much for coming to our community. I also want to thank you for not politicizing it, like many people who came to our community and stood on our blood-stained streets and did so for their own political gain, who didn't care about the people of my community. So I want to thank you for not politicizing this and for saying and for waiting until we were ready. Because there are a lot of people who frankly didn't care about these young people and these families. They didn't care about them, and I don't know how they could sit there and listen to these mothers crying and not be affected. They were mothers crying for their children, and they went right back to Washington and voted against sensible gun legislation. So we've got to do something.
Right.
Because we can't, as much as we make a beautiful, wonderful, inclusive community in Orlando, it's not going to make any difference if our kids can't walk our streets, or they can't go to church, or they can't go to a nightclub, or they can't go to an elementary school and not be safe.
Right.
Thank you, Miss Secretary, for coming.
Next, I'd like to introduce Imam Muhammad Musri, who is a passionate leader in the Muslim community. He joined us on the 12th for several of the press conferences that we had. He's the senior Imam and president and chairman of the board of the Islamic Society of Central Florida, which operates 10 mosques in Central Florida. He's been out comforting not just the Muslim community, but our entire community. Imam.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership. We are inspired by your leadership, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for visiting our community, standing with the families, because we need to come together, all of us. The political leaders, the community leaders, the religious leaders. And that what defined this community. Under his leadership, Mayor Dyer had convened Council of Clergy, and over the years they worked together, they got to know each other, and to promote a culture of love and respect rather than hate and bigotry. And immediately after this tragic event, all the religious leaders came together, and there was a press conference and a prayer service at Mayor Jacobs, the county mayor, where for the first time you see it didn't matter what religion the faith leader was from. They were all speaking with one voice, supporting the LGBT community in their time of sorrow, and that's a beautiful model for a community. The faith leaders who preach the second commandment, love thy neighbor as yourself, not hate this and hate that and dividing the community. They must take a leadership role in making communities really vibrant and loving.
I so appreciate your leadership on this, Imam. Thank you for speaking on behalf of so many who share your hope that we can move into a culture of love and respect, which is our only hope if we're going to be a united country where, Mayor, we are stronger together. We have to begin to practice that, and I appreciate your thoughts.
You know, a lot of faith leaders, unfortunately, in some parts of the country, they try to use this issue as a wedge issue between the LGBT community and the Muslim community. But you tell them, you know, Commander Mark Hanty is a Muslim. He put his life on the line to rescue lives that morning. There are Muslim doctors who rush to save lives. And that's the true image of American Muslims, not just focus on the shooter who is a mass murderer who we reject as not a person of faith.
Thank you. Thank you.
Captain Mark Canty is one of the many heroes from June the 12th. I watched him personally in action. He's been with the OPD for 20 years. He's a leader among his peers. He's loved and respected in the community. He's the team commander of the SWAT team, and he was the SWAT commander on the night of the 12th. Mark, you want to share your thoughts about that night?
That night, I happened to be awake. I had just gotten off the phone probably an hour before with one of the first responders, who's also one of my SWAT team deputy team commanders, and we had talked about an incident happened earlier that day. So when I got the page, and just kind of the way that the page went out, I knew was something serious. I attempted to call him and kind of get an idea what was going on, and he obviously was busy, wouldn't answer the phone. So then I really knew it was bad. And as I got to the scene and I got briefed, and I saw the emergency vehicles and the officers there, and pickup trucks driving up and down the street, putting people in the back of it, really thought this was bad. I think what kind of made me feel a little bit comfortable or felt a little bit at ease, I knew the training that our department has. I think we have one of the best SWAT teams in the country. We have some of the best patrol officers around, and I think they're the true heroes because I think they responded in a way that, quite frankly, exceeded my expectations. I knew we would do a good job, and I knew we would handle the situation, but they responded, and they stayed in that building, and even though they were in great peril, there's talk of explosives, and they thought, that the building could blow up, but they stayed. They took no regard for themselves because they knew there were dozens of people still trapped inside, and we had to do everything we could to get them out. I think what's happened across this country over the last probably two or 3 years with law enforcement is I think people focus on a couple of bad incidents, and they don't really look at the number of good officers that are out there. And I think if you look at Orlando, the bond that we have, with the community did not start on June 12th. I think we put a lot of work into building those relationships. We have an LGBT liaison. We have connections with the African American community. We have connections with the Hispanic community. We have connections with the Muslim community. So we spent the time, over my entire career, I've seen this happen where if something happens in the black community, black leaders in the black community know they can get on the phone and they can call the chief, they can call the mayor, and they can find out what's going on. If something happens in the Muslim community, they have connections here with our local law enforcement. So we have those connections. I think that is what made June 12th and the post-terror event not as bad, because we were there to support each other in the aftermath, and it's going to continue. And I think as things go on, things will get better. And I think a couple people have said it. They've talked about the divide, and I think we use our different groups, or people use our different groups to kind of divide us. And if you kind of look deep, you'll find that we have more similarities. We have a program here called Orlando Speaks, where we bring, it's put on by the city, the police department, and Valencia College's Peace and Justice Institute. And it's a program where we bring police officers and members from the community, and we sit down at a table and we have discussions. So there's a police officer at every table, there may be a religious leader, there may be just a regular citizen from the community, and they have discussions and they get to know each other. And one of the things we do at the end is we ask every group, well, what are your needs? And we find out that they're similar. The two lists are almost identical, and some of the keys on there is everybody wants to feel safe. Officers want to go home safe. The community wants to feel safe when they deal with officers. And the other thing is they want to be respected. Both groups want to be respected. So I think if we can stop focusing so much on our differences and think about the things that we have in common, things will be a lot better.
Amen. How long has Orlando Speaks been going on?
We're about to hit our first year. So we've done 3 events so far. We're planning the 4th here in the next couple of weeks.
Would you think, Captain, that that would be a good model for other communities?
Absolutely. I think we've already been, I think Tampa has contacted us, as well as another small city in Atlanta called Palaca. So people are, as they start to hear about it, they're starting to see that maybe this has some value. And it's a different way to kind of bring the community together. We have done, over the last 2 years, I think the chief and I had probably participated in probably close to 20 community forums. And I think those have been very effective, because it gives the community an opportunity to kind of express themselves and tell us what they're thinking. But a lot of the problem with that is the community comes and they say what they're going to say, and then members of the law enforcement community say what they're going to say, and like I said, no one really is listening. With Orlando Speaks, there's some rules involved where you kind of have to let people listen, or let people talk, and you just have to listen. Even if they finish before their time, you have to sit there and listen to them. So I think those have created some relationships that have gone on past just the seminar. Those people who have remained connected afterwards, and they have a better, when you leave, you have a better understanding of what each group is, what their concerns are.
That's a great idea.
Madam Secretary, Orlando Speaks was kind of born out of Baltimore and Ferguson, and we think that we have a pretty good relationship between OPD and just about every one of our communities in Orlando. And as Mark said, you can't make those relationships on the day that the crisis is occurring. You've got to have those relationships beforehand. So even though we thought we were doing a pretty good job, we were looking at ways, how can we do better? And Orlando Speaks was one of those ways.
Great idea, Mayor.
So Carlos Guillermo Smith is an LGBT Latino leader and activist here in Central Florida. He's the Government Affairs Manager for Equality Florida, and has been a guiding light since the tragedy, and self-organized a number of the vigils that have occurred. So Carlos, could you share your thoughts on how the tragedy what it's meant to the LGBT community?
Sure, absolutely, Mayor Dyer. Thank you, Secretary Clinton, for being here and for meeting with us. What really struck so many of us about this tragedy after it happened, other than its unthinkable scope, was also about how deeply impacted the LGBTQ and Latino community was. 96% of the victims from the Pulse shooting were Latino. And that intersectionality is a very, very important part of this conversation. In the early days after we learned about the tragedy, the Latino identities of many of the victims were erased and almost invisible from the conversation. Since then, some of that has changed, but the reason it's important to talk about the identities of many of these victims is, as you mentioned, Secretary Clinton, hate crimes are still very much a big part of the problem, and hate and bigotry and racism is a problem that many of our communities are tackling together. Overall, we know that hate crimes are on the decline, but hate crimes are actually on the rise against Muslim Americans. Hate crimes are on the rise against transgender women of color in particular. Just in the United States, 15 transgender women have been murdered in the last year. At one point, every 3 days, a transgender woman was murdered in the world, on this planet, on this earth. That's a problem. It's a problem not only because of the type of ideology and negativity that this type of hatred and bigotry does to our society, but I think what many of us are facing together and learning together is that it's very, very difficult to change people's hearts and minds. We have to address it, but this hate, bigotry, and racism is killing us. And so much of the major part of this dialogue is that guns have turned the hatred, bigotry, and racism into something very deadly, and have made it deadly. The anecdote I'll share with you is one that I experienced here recently. Many of the folks in the community here in Orlando had a makeshift memorial in front of the Dr. Phillips Center, and I've been back there a few times since the tragedy. I was there last Sunday to participate in an American Muslims Against Hate event, but then when the crowd dissipated and the area cleared, I spent a few moments to myself just to take it in again, and once again I got caught up in the emotions and the grief around seeing that memorial, and unexpectedly I heard some commotion behind me, and I turned around and 1,000 Black Lives Matter protesters coincidentally had converged on the memorial at that time, and there were 5 young black women whose names I don't know because they were strangers, these total strangers. These angels just kind of saw me there and held me in their arms, and we all cried together. And I think it was that moment where I realized that there's so much that we all have in common. And right now, even though we all have our own identities that we're very proud of, that this hatred, racism, and bigotry, unfortunately for many of our communities, the Latino community, the Muslim community, the LGBT community, the Black community, that we are facing this type of hate and violence together, and that there has to be some solution to that.
Do you have any thoughts about that kind of solution that you would be looking for?
Well, I've seen a lot of the conversations and have been part of the dialogue around gun safety, and I think that that's a very important part of it. Not because we can prevent every act of gun violence,
Right.
but when I think about the weapon that was used here in Orlando, the Sig Sauer is the name of the model, which is a new age model of the AR-15 that was used to kill 49 of our friends. A similar model was used to murder 20 children in Sandy Hook. A similar model was used to kill a dozen innocent people in Aurora, Colorado. And what I'm struggling, and so many people in the community are struggling to understand, is why a military-style assault weapon like that exists, and what is the legitimate civilian purpose for this type of weapon. And I think that that's a really, really important question to be asking as a result of all of this, because hatred is not an easy problem to solve.
And it's not a new problem, but as I was talking earlier with some people here, enabling someone with hatred, bigotry, racism, homophobia, whatever the motivation might be, enabling that person with this kind of military assault weapon just takes so much more, takes so many more lives, creates so much more havoc. It is something that doesn't belong on the streets of any American community. And so we've got to keep making that case. You mentioned a few of the terrible incidents where innocent people going on with their lives were destroyed because it's so quick to kill with those weapons.
And our last member of the roundtable is Ida Eskimansky, who is also with Equality Florida. She's the North and Central Florida Development Director. She has overseen the Pulse Victims Fund, which immediately grew to $4 million after June the 12th, and has continued to grow to $7 million, and has recently merged with the One Orlando Fund, and combined they are now over $20 million. You want to give us some of your thoughts, Ida?
Sure. I work for Equality Florida. I'm also born and raised here in Orlando. I'm a first-generation Iranian American. I am a straight ally, and I live about a mile from Pulse. Pulse was, I think, the first gay bar I've been to, but it was sort of a hazy night. But when we learned of the shooting, we at Equality Florida knew that we had to immediately jump into action, because that's what we do. We're an advocacy organization. And so we launched a GoFundMe site to fundraise for the victims' families and survivors, and we quickly, the entire global community reacted, and we are now over 118,000 people have donated from 120 countries across the world, and we're at 7.3 million, and we're so humbled to work with the city to partner to disperse these funds as fast as possible. I also work with many local social justice organizations. I love to build coalitions and identify those intersections. I am a proud feminist, as I know you are, and so I approach things from that lens of intersectionality and our shared oppression. And we talk often about our differences and how we are stronger together, and I think it's important that we embrace our differences, because we in Orlando here are such a diverse community, and in that we find strength. And so we need to embrace those differences and truly be stronger together. And just looking at this table and this room, so many incredible people here have come together in this time to serve the victims' families and survivors. And we're doing everything we can, and there are so many organizations in this room that have played such a critical role to do that. Serving the victims' families and survivors, for me, I've gotten to know a lot of these families. I work a lot in the African American community and advocacy, and so many of these folks have come to me. And when I talk with them and hear their struggles, and with the Latino community and hear their struggles, it's very clear that there are many intersections, not only with LGBTQ discrimination, but with starvation wages, that these folks were already struggling to pay their rent, and now they're in the hospital for months. These folks were already victims to an unjust immigration system, and now we as a community have to do what we could to get their family from abroad here to the United States for their funerals, or have those remains transported abroad. These folks were already victims of discrimination of all forms that you could imagine: transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia. I mean, these folks, there's already so much injustice that these folks have dealt with. And we here in Orlando have an opportunity to tackle all of those, to fight for the 49 lives lost and the 53 lives injured and the countless traumatized. We have an opportunity to make good, and I know no one here at this table, no one in this room wanted to be here, but we have this horrific hate crime that happened in a sanctuary for this community, and we need to do everything we can to make good of this. And all we've seen across the country is more violence, more discrimination, and Orlando, we can do it. We can find these solutions. We can work together, find common ground, hold those accountable that need to be held accountable to do good for not just this community, but for the entire country. And so when we talk about it from a national lens, when we need to address equal protection. You can still be fired, you can still be refused housing, public accommodations for being LGBTQ. We need to tackle starvation wages and make sure folks can, if they work a full-time job, they can support their families and live the American dream that my family had access to. We need to make sure that we have a just immigration system, and we need to do everything we can to rid all forms of discrimination, whether it be police brutality, whether it be xenophobia or Islamophobia, and we need to get these vicious guns off the streets. And that is assault rifles, but it's also supporting communities of color, which lack socioeconomic opportunities, and these young kids have to turn to gang violence because that's all they know. And so we here in Orlando, I think all are committed to tackling all of these issues, and we are so grateful for you to be here to hear our story, because we have a lot of work to do, but we are committed to make good of this, and we're going to do it together because we embrace those differences.
That is exactly right, Ida. Exactly right. And I think it's absolutely fair to link a lot of these other issues together, because I don't want people to breathe a big sigh of relief if Orlando pulls itself together in a resilient, generous, loving way, and yet not very far from here, the same kinds of behavior, the same social, economic challenges are still present. And I want to commend you and the entire community for the funds that you have put together and the very smart decision to merge the two funds. I have some experience with this because of what happened after 9/11 and how important it was to have one fund for victims and families, survivors, and to have someone responsible. And the mayor's told me that you've got a very good man, Ken Feinberg, who I've worked with on several occasions, but most particularly after 9/11, to try to make sense of all this, to try to deal with the multiple of challenges and needs that people are feeling. So congratulations. I mean, it's an important step in this whole process that you have that capacity to help people.
Absolutely.
So we like to say that diversity is our greatest strength, and I think most of the people in Orlando believe that and live that every day. And on the Sunday after Pulse, I was in a Episcopal church service, and the pastor there, who was new to our community, said that God has anointed the citizens of Orlando with the light to stand up against hatred and to embrace diversity and equality and fairness, and we would be an example for the rest of the country. So thoughts on that? Anybody? Imam, how's the Muslim community feeling 5 weeks after?
As you probably heard earlier from Carlos, we had an avalanche of threats and hate from all over the country. And by the way, it didn't come from Central Florida, it didn't come from Florida, it mostly came from other states, people who do not understand the relationship we have as a community here, and their hate is the same hate by the same groups who hate the LGBT community, who hate the Latino community. But they're feeding this hate that you arm it with an AR-15 and then it becomes deadly. We have to uproot the hate through love, through teaching love, and we have to also have the policy from our federal government to disarm that hate. So if a hateful person ends up trying to hurt someone, they're not going to be able to hurt so many people in such a short time. And that cannot be done without, bringing, for example, the assault rifle legislation that was there when President Clinton was there in '94 till 2004. That should not have been sunset. If you restore just that, I think we would save many, many lives. And you stated many times, over 33,000 Americans lose their lives in this country from gun violence. If we save half of that, that's every American life that we save is a precious life. That is a responsibility, especially for faith leaders who speak about, life. But life is not just for the unborn. Life is for those who are still here. And they deserve the right for safety and security. It's not just the police have to provide, but we all have to come together to make sure all the factors are there for safety for every American of every walk of life.
If I could, Mayor, just quickly go around and see if there's any additional comments or suggestions that anyone on the panel might have. Commissioner?
One thing that really struck me, when we did a vigil and memorial for the victims, there was a church, a Methodist church across the street that actually chimed their church bells for each victim, and it took 9 minutes to do that. And I've talked to some of the officers. I know I'm not supposed to talk about the investigation, but they estimate that most of the victims were killed in 5 minutes. So in other words, it took more time to ring church bells to honor them than it did to kill them. And I think that is that's obscene. That this kind of violence happens in our communities, and we need to get a handle on it. One of the most touching moments for me as an LGBTQ person, and I've been doing this since I was in my 20s, so I've been doing this a while. Not going to say how many years, but for me to be with that group of religious leaders at the county building, Mayor Jacobs, our county mayor, her aide called me and said, "You need to come over to the county building." I'm like, "I'm so busy, I don't really have time." And I'm so glad that I made the time. I ran over there and literally hear all these religious leaders who have basically preached inequality and did not embrace the LGBT community. Basically, some have been very supportive all these years, but others had not been, and they took responsibility for that. So what I'm saying is there is an opportunity for change. This changed a lot of people's hearts, and I think it can continue to do that if people will have open hearts. So even the religious leaders who have been so against the LGBT community came around and in some cases even apologized. And I think that can happen, that is important, and we need to be able to open our hearts to others.
Great. Captain?
I'd just like to say that I'd like communities to know that the police department is there for you. I think former Philadelphia Commissioner Charles Ramsey said, our job is not just to protect and serve, it is to ensure the constitutional rights of all people. So I think if we start to get that in our mind and start to kind of think that way instead of just enforcing the law, I think we'll be better off. I think, like I said, I think we've done a great job here in Orlando. I think it could be a model for other communities. I think with the programs we have, from our mentoring program, we have Operation Positive Direction, from Dueling Dragons, a paddling team with cops and kids. If you start to kind of reach out and start doing things like that and building those relationships, so you're having those conversations before things happen, I think that's better. I was just up in D.C. At a conference, and I actually happened to go to my brother is part of a church up there, and I was speaking to a men's group, and they were kind of asking me a lot of questions on why is this happening? What are the police doing? And I was like, well, when was the last time you invited the police to a service? When was the last time you had an event, you said, hey, can the police come? Will you come? Will you show up? Will you bring out your horses and your dogs and your motorcycles and your SWAT team? And they couldn't answer. And here in this community, I can tell you that I have so many requests for police officers, whether it's a SWAT team or a canine unit or horses. We don't have enough officers to do that. I mean, just because the community, they want us there and we want to be there. So that's how we build a community. We do, like I said, Orlando Speaks. We do Coffee with a Cop, which is a kind of a no agenda thing that started in California, where you just come in. We use McDonald's here. You come in, you sit down with an officer and you can have a conversation. And I had one of those conversations with someone who did not like the police, and he told me that when we sat down. And I said, I don't think I can change your mind, but if you give me the benefit of the doubt, before you jump to judgment, give me the benefit of the doubt. And then he actually called me. He's called me a couple of times, but he called me the other day and said, hey, I called you because I want to apologize because some officers came out and we had a disagreement, and I kind of let them have it both barrels, and I want to apologize because they didn't deserve that. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just there. So I think if we build those relationships and we focus on that, things will get better. And like I said, this community, Orlando's community and the surrounding areas, they have some of the best law enforcement. They have some of the best officers. I am so proud of them. I'm so proud to be a part of the police department. I grew up in Orlando. My mom is born and raised here. My family lives here. You know, I work here, I worship here, I do all that kind of thing. So when my mom and my dad are driving around, I want them to feel safe. And I kind of tell people, and I've said this a couple times in the past, is, you know, the way I police is I police like my mother's watching. And for those that know
That's a
me,
great line.
my mother is watching, because if she was here, she would be celebrating and say, hey, you know, that's my son. But if you police that way and you think that way, hey, is my mother going to be proud of what I'm doing? Then you won't have to worry about, you know, whether there's a camera watching you or what's going to be shown on the news about what I did yesterday. Because I did the right thing, because, you know, my mom's watching.
Remember that.
I do.
Remember that. Terry, anything else?
Just as everybody said, we need to pull together, as the mom said. You know, 2 days after this happened on June 12th, we at the center received 3 threatening letters. We had to turn them over to the FBI. But I have to say that OPD, OFD, Orange County Sheriff, and the FBI did an amazing job keeping us involved. I had FBI in my office every 15, 20 minutes for that first week and a half. And the OPD still stops by. The one thing that I am finding that we are having a problem with is information flowing down. The FBI did vet all the families that came over to the Citrus Bowl and got that information, and then went back to Washington, and we can't get it back. So we're basically reinventing the wheel, going back, trying to find all the victims, trying to vet everybody once again when it's already been done. If we could get that information back, we could help people a lot faster than we are right now.
I watched Senator Nelson listening very intently.
Yeah, that's a big portion. That's a problem we're having right now, is getting that list back down here, because we could be missing people. And we're afraid we're missing people, and we don't want to miss anybody.
Right. Ida, any last thoughts?
I think for all of us, we've never had a more important job in our careers. We are doing everything we can to honor these lives and serve the families and the victims. And so there's a few pieces to it. We need to do everything we can in the immediate and the long term to support the lives lost and injured and traumatized. And as a community, we're committed to that. But we also have to honor their legacies through action and uproot hate and disarm hate. And, you know, we have a saying here with the marriage equality movement that love is louder. But love is only louder if we raise our collective voices. And I know Orlando is committed to that. And as a nation, we need to be, because love is only louder if we make sure that it's louder.
Right.
And we're committed to doing that.
Right. And finally, Carlos.
Well, I would agree with much of what's been said, Secretary Clinton, and I would also say that I'm very proud of the Orlando community and every part of the Orlando community that didn't listen to the voices after this unthinkable tragedy that told us to turn against each other. I'm proud of the fact that when LGBT leaders and Latino leaders came together with the Muslim and Islamic community, that it wasn't a first-time introduction for all of us, that we've been working together to uproot hatred and uproot bigotry for a long time before this tragedy. And I think part of the solution in dealing with this hatred and bigotry and racism and gun violence is not a partisan issue. It's really not. When we talk about sensible gun safety, that is something that I know independent and Democratic and Republican voters agree that there are sensible reforms that are needed. All we have to do is look here locally to see what the response has been. Not only has Mayor Dyer, who happens to be a Democrat, not only has he been an incredible leader, but also our Mayor of Orange County, Teresa Jacobs, who happens to be a Republican, has been a wonderful voice for equality and justice since the shooting, and she's done a wonderful job of leading. And it has forced a lot of difficult conversations. And if something good can be made out of such an unthinkable tragedy, it is having that dialogue, because we have found in our work and in our experience that this dialogue creates understanding, and from that understanding, we gain acceptance from many communities that we didn't think would accept us. I've had a lot of really positive interactions with faith leaders, for example, in the wake of this tragedy. Faith leaders who have always been more conservative on social issues, who have been less accepting of LGBT people in general, and they have, in many senses, like Commissioner Sheehan said, they've apologized and committed to working with us on creating a dialogue moving forward. But even separate from gun safety, I know we didn't have a chance to address this directly. I'm proud of the city's leadership in setting up this fund that's going to help with our long-term needs. Because one of the long-term needs in the wake of this is going to be mental health care.
Right.
And while so many of the folks who are part of this process keep telling us that we can't talk about guns, they point to mental health care, but here in Florida ranks 49th out of 50 for funding for mental health care services. And so I hope that maybe in a similar way that the James Zadroga Act, which passed after 9/11 to help with much of the physical health care and mental health care needs of the victims, the reality is that this was such a huge tragedy, and the communities that have been impacted are communities of scale, that there is also a solution as it relates to access to these services over the long term, because as Ida mentioned before, many of these communities are already marginalized communities. Many of the victims were Black and Latino, who in Central Florida disproportionately make lower wages and have less access to these benefits. So a solution perhaps federally that addresses some of these long-term needs, particularly with mental health care services, is important.
Yeah, it's not either or.
Yeah.
It's
Correct.
both and.
Yep.
Well, Mayor, thank you.
Madam Secretary, we just want to thank you for coming today. It's part of our healing process, and I think Commissioner Sheehan said it. We also want to thank you for the manner of your visit and the timing of your visit, so thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. That's funny.
Please.